President Obama delivered a farewell address to the armed forces yesterday in a ceremony at a military base in Arlington, Virginia. The president received the Department of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service, along with honors from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard. The president reflected on the burden the military carries for the nation and on his responsibilities as Commander-in-Chief.
By stepping forward and volunteering, by raising your right hand and taking that oath, each of you made a solemn pledge. You committed yourself to a life of service and of sacrifice. And I, in turn, made a promise to you, which, to the best of my abilities, I've tried to uphold every single day since. That I would only send you into harm's way when it was absolutely necessary, with a strategy and well-defined goals, with the equipment and the support that you needed to get the job done. A lot of Americans don't see the sacrifices you make on our behalf. But as Commander-in-Chief, I do. I've seen it when I look into the eyes of young cadets, knowing that my decisions could very well send them into harm's way. We are called to remember core principles. That we must never hesitate to act when necessary to defend our nation, but we must also never rush into war, because sending you into harm's way should be a last and not first resort. It should be compelled by the needs of our security and not our politics.
Joining us now, White House correspondent for the New York Times, Mark Landler. His new piece on the Afghan war and the evolution of Obama is part of the paper's 6-part series on the president's legacy titled The Obama Era. Mark, great to have you with us. Thanks so much. Boy, a lot to sift through. President Obama came into office in 2009 with about 40,000 troops in Afghanistan. He'll leave with, he hopes, by about 8,400, something like that. How has this war shaped his presidency?
Well, I think you could say that really across the board, if you look at the way he deals with war and peace, whether it's the use of clandestine, covert drones and Navy SEAL teams, whether it's the way he deals with the generals, whether it's the way he deals with foreign leaders, all of those experiences were really forged for him in Afghanistan and then really played through the rest of his presidency. So if you look at the way he's dealt with Libya and Syria and Iraq in the post-ISIS era, a lot of those decisions and instincts were really influenced by the experiences he had, and in some cases the disillusioning experiences he had dealing with the Afghanistan war.
And Mark, it's true, is it not, that he came into office thinking that Afghanistan was a winnable war, or whatever that means exactly, and over the years got a little bit more disillusioned as the reality set in, to borrow Dexter Filkins' term, that this may be a forever war in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you recall, he ran in 2008 as the candidate who said, I don't oppose all wars, I oppose dumb wars, which in that context, of course, meant the Iraq War. But he did feel that Afghanistan was not only winnable, but should be the top priority for the U.S. And so he came in, shifted a lot of resources to Afghanistan. You remember the famous debate over the troop deployment in the fall of 2009, ended up sending 30,000 additional troops to Afghanistan, but then quickly discovered that some of the more ambitious plans that the military had for counterinsurgency policy really were not working as well as anyone hoped they would. And then over the period of the first term, really began to scale back his ambitions for what he wanted to accomplish in Afghanistan, and really then spent the second part of his presidency trying very hard to get out of Afghanistan and finding out how difficult that was. If you recall, there was a plan first to pull out by the end of 2014. Then there was a plan to pull out by the end of 2016. And last year, President Obama acknowledged he wasn't going to meet that goal because there was a renewed threat in Afghanistan, not just from al-Qaeda and the Taliban, but also from the Islamic State, which had established a foothold in Afghanistan. So in essence, at the end of his presidency, to use Dexter Filkins' great term, he became the commander-in-chief of the forever war. This is now a war he turns over to Donald Trump, albeit with a much smaller American footprint than when he came in, but still close to 10,000 troops, and a major challenge for the new president to confront.
So, Mark, Can you think of a better example of, for lack of a better phrase, the education of a president who assumes office with such great intentions, such honorable intentions that everybody's in favor of, and then is confronted with the reality of a war that we are fighting and are still fighting? Is that not a great lesson for any incoming president, especially a president who's coming in now with no relative experience in government?
It absolutely is. And, you know, remember, this is not a president who came in with what he would say were misplaced hopes. He was already a skeptic about the role that America can play in foreign conflicts. So he came in with this pretty healthy dose of skepticism. I think one of the things he found out, particularly in his first year as an inexperienced young commander-in-chief, was how hard it was to go toe-to-toe with the military in the debate over what was the right policy. He was always unhappy with the way that first troop debate played out. I think he felt to some extent he'd been rolled by the generals.
Yeah.
You recall when he did send in those 30,000 additional troops, he also put a time limit on them. He said, I'm going to send in these troops, but I'm going to set a date certain for withdrawing the bulk of that surge again. And that was, you know, in turn criticized very heavily by John McCain and many other critics who said that once you set a date for America's withdrawal, all the Taliban has to do is wait you out. And indeed, to some extent, that's what happened. So all along the way, it was an education for the president, both in the limits of what American troops can do, but also in the kinds of unintended consequences that you can set by doing things like setting a date certain for a withdrawal.
And Mark, given all of the investment and focus that the president had evolved over the years on Afghanistan, how will history judge how he handled ISIS?
Well, I think with ISIS, you have to obviously disaggregate ISIS in its core area in Syria and Iraq. And, you know, the administration argues they just, in John Kerry exit memo that was just submitted to the president, I think yesterday or this morning, he argues that ISIS only holds 61% of the territory it held at its height. You know, so I think the administration would make the case that this is a long, grinding battle, but it's moving in the right direction. In Afghanistan, where ISIS has also established a foothold, I think the problem here is that the government in Afghanistan, which we have spent tens and hundreds of billions of dollars supporting the Afghan security forces that we have spent so many years training and equipping, are really still in a very pitched battle with the Taliban and with al-Qaeda for control of that country. So I think for the president, as history judges, it's going to be a very mixed picture in Afghanistan. He's still left a country where the ultimate outcome is, I think, still up for grabs between the extremists and the central government. And that's probably a difficult legacy given the sheer amount of time and effort he put into Afghanistan.
We've only scratched the surface on this piece and this issue. We'll read much more from you, Mark Landler, and your reporting in the New York Times. Thanks so much.